I never imagined my life would come to this. Living out of a camper van, parked outside a coffee shop just to leech off their Wi-Fi, typing away on my laptop like some drifter. But here I am, 6 months after my marriage crumbled into something unrecognizable. I'm 35, and until recently, I thought I had it all. A stable job, a home, a beautiful wife of 12 years, and the pride and joy of my life, our 12-year-old daughter. I worked as an electrician for the city's power grid. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough. I enjoyed the work, the satisfaction of fixing things, keeping the lights on for thousands of people. My wife worked at an insurance firm, and between our two salaries, we got by comfortably. We weren't rich, but we had enough to take small vacations every summer, keep our home in good shape, and even put away a bit of savings for the future. I thought we had a solid marriage. We made time for date nights, shared hobbies, and always had family dinners together. I thought communication was one of our strengths. If something bothered me, I'd bring it up. If she was stressed, she'd vent to me over a glass of wine. I thought we had that kind of relationship, the kind that could weather anything. I was wrong. It all fell apart on a random Tuesday evening in March. I remember the day clearly because it felt so ordinary, so routine. I came home late after sitting through a mandatory safety training session at work. My wife had fallen asleep on the couch, her legs tucked under a blanket. The TV hummed softly in the background. As I walked past, her phone screen lit up with a message. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. We trusted each other, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the emojis. Those hard eyes, the kissy faces, the same ones I used when I messaged her. My gut twisted. I told myself I was being paranoid, but curiosity got the better of me. For the first time in 12 years of marriage, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a silly text from one of her friends or a group chat joke. What I found instead shattered my world. The messages were explicit, not just flirtation or suggestive banter, but long exchanges filled with intimacy and affection. Things she hadn't said to me in years. My heart pounded as I scrolled further, seeing dates, times, and even photos exchanged. The affair had been going on for at least 5 months. The worst part, I knew the man. We had been to his house, met his wife. I'd shaken his hand while our kids played in the backyard. His youngest child wasn't even 2 years old. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while my wife slept peacefully beside me. I could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing, the same familiar sound that used to bring me comfort. Now it felt foreign. The next morning, she complained about a crick in her neck from sleeping on the couch. I barely registered her words. Everything felt distant, like I was watching my life from the outside. At breakfast, I sat silently at the table while she and our daughter laughed and talked as if nothing had changed. That's when it hit me. Maybe nothing had changed for them. Maybe they hadn't really noticed me for a long time. For 5 days, I barely spoke. I went through the motions, work, dinner, bed. I wondered if they'd notice my silence. They didn't. My wife didn't ask what was wrong until the 6th day. Even then, she asked so casually between bites of pasta at dinner. I shrugged. She didn't press the issue. The next day, I called in sick and packed a small bag. Camping gear, some food, and the essentials. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for her to come home from work. When she walked through the door, arms full of groceries, she barely glanced at me. She unpacked while our daughter helped, chattering about school and sales at the store. They had their backs to me the entire time. I felt invisible. Something inside me snapped. I stood up and hurled my glass at the wall. It shattered, and they both spun around, staring at me in shock. Tears blurred my vision as I spoke the words that had been burning inside me since that Tuesday night. I know about your affair. My voice was calm, too calm for how I felt inside. My daughter turned to her mother, demanding to know if it was true. But instead of answering me, they started arguing with each other. It was like I wasn't even in the room. I stood there for a few moments, listening to them fight, and then I walked out. I got in my car and drove. It took them 15 minutes to realize I was gone. The calls and texts started flooding in. The next morning, I withdrew half our savings. I didn't care about the consequences. I went to the other man's house and knocked on his door. His wife answered, holding their baby on her hip. I handed her printed screenshots of the messages. She didn't say a word as she read them, tears welling in her eyes. I left her standing there and checked into a cheap motel. 3 days later, my wife's brother, who also happened to be a cop, showed up at my door. Without a word, he cuffed me and drove me home. Not to the station. Home. As soon as I walked inside, my wife and daughter unleashed their fury. They screamed at me for disappearing, for making them worry. I stood there in silence, letting them yell. Say something, my wife finally screamed. I met her eyes, my voice steady. I have nothing to say to you. That's when her brother lost it. He slammed me against the wall, shouting in my face. I laughed. I knew his wife had left him recently, so I hit him where it hurt. She left you because she couldn't stand you. He punched me. Hard. I tasted blood but kept laughing. I woke up in the hospital, disoriented and nauseous. They were all there, my wife, daughter, and brother-in-law. I told the nurse I wanted them gone. When they left, I made my decision. I was done. I wrote 3 letters. One to my wife, one to my daughter, and one to her brother. I warned him, if he ever came near me again, I'd report him for assault. I haven't looked back since. I explained to my daughter that her mother's betrayal meant I couldn't be her father anymore. To my wife, I wrote a longer letter about practical matters, telling her to sell the house and that I wouldn't pay any bills. I also mentioned that she'd need to handle the divorce if she wanted one. I regretted adding one final line about how much she hurt me. It felt like giving her one last piece of myself to destroy. One evening, I snuck out through the fire escape. The alarm went off, but nobody stopped me. I got back to my motel, traded my car for a small RV, and left town. I got a new phone and only gave the number to my father, warning him that if he shared it with anyone, he'd never hear from me again. For months, I grieved what I'd lost, but gradually realized I was mourning an illusion. The loving family I thought I had never really existed. I became a ghost, using only a P.O. box for mail, keeping my valuables in a safety deposit box, and working odd jobs for cash. I started hunting and fishing for food, brewing my own beer, and living simply in my RV. I made new friends at hunting camps, gave everyone a fake name, and spent most of my time in nature. I got into the best shape of my life. I had no obligations, no pressures, and surprisingly, I found peace in this new existence. Sometimes I'd visit crowded places, malls, train stations, bus terminals, and watch other men like I used to be. Men sacrificing everything for families that didn't appreciate them, working themselves to death for more things they didn't need, wearing that same empty stare I used to have. I didn't know if I was divorced, if I owed child support, or what happened to our house. My father tried to tell me a few times, but I shut that down. He was the only connection to my old life that I maintained, and even that was minimal. I planned that when I reached the end, I'd sell everything, burn through my money, and walk into a national park never to be seen again. But life had other plans. After sharing my story online one day, everything changed again. Reading people's responses to my story started making me feel strange. The world began to feel muffled again, just like the day I confronted my wife. I called one of my hunting friends, Hawk, and asked him to come over. He stayed on the phone until he arrived, immediately confiscating my ammunition. He must have sensed something was wrong because he called my father, who drove 4 hours to reach me. They took me to a doctor, and I ended up in a psychiatric facility. The doctor said I had emotional trauma and depression. All those things I thought were normal, the numbness, wanting to be alone, laughing when getting beaten up, were actually signs of serious mental health issues. My father told me my daughter had been asking about me, that she loved me. I hadn't let myself believe that before. Even my wife's brother sent me a message explaining that my wife hadn't told him the full story when she asked for his help. He reported himself to his superiors and faced suspension and anger management training. He even prepared paperwork for me to file a complaint that would get him fired. After a week of treatment and therapy, I started improving. My daughter visited, telling me she forgave me and never meant to make me feel unappreciated. At first, I didn't believe her, but therapy helped me see that my doubts were my own issues. She moved in with my brother temporarily, since I wasn't ready to be a full-time parent. My wife moved back with her parents. Her affair partner tried fixing things with his wife and cut all contact with her. According to her mother, she lost her job and barely left her room, shunned by everyone who knew what happened. I hired a lawyer and started divorce proceedings. I bought Hawk a bottle of his favorite whiskey to thank him for saving my life. Without him and the people who pushed me to see I needed help, I might not be here today. The house sold quickly, and I used the money to buy a small cabin in the woods. Not tiny, but simple, with 2 bedrooms and a huge porch overlooking the forest. My daughter loves it here. The divorce is almost final, and my wife agreed to give me everything, though I plan to split it fairly once it's done. She asks for another chance almost daily, but accepts my boundaries. She only wants to rebuild her relationship with our daughter, which I support despite their current strain. We're all in counseling now, individual and family therapy. My daughter watches carefully how I treat her mother, so I make sure to be respectful. I'm still not the same person I was before. I prefer being alone except for my daughter, and I don't trust easily anymore, but I'm not unhappy. The quiet life suits me now. Looking back at when I first posted my story, I was in a dark place. Getting harsh but honest feedback helped snap me out of it. While our family as I knew it is gone, we're all finding our way forward. My daughter has both parents in her life, even if we're not together. I've learned that sometimes breaking down completely is the first step to rebuilding something better. I still enjoy the solitude of our forest home, but now it's a choice rather than an escape. Sometimes healing doesn't mean going back to who you were, but accepting who you become. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.